Deconverted Man here. Apologetics Roadshow. I saw your video here. World's smartest atheist finally admits what Christians knew all along. I dislike this video. I feel that you're doing a lot of cherry picking in order to make your point, and you're not doing any of the sort of charity that we would expect, steel manning your opponent, the principle of charity. It seems that you're picking at nits here, and it seems you're also kind of missing the points. The questions that are asked in a way that the person is attempting to respond in a way that is honest to him. And you seem to be missing the point. And you then conflate this particular atheist, that this would apply to every atheist or all atheists or many atheists. No, it's not a debate review. I don't know what debate he might have done. This is a single review on this video, but not even really reviewing this particular video per se, but Apologetics Roadshow, listen. I'd want you to answer the questions that were asked in the interview yourself. Obviously, you already believe in a particular version of a particular God. So if the interviewer was asking you, well, what would it take for you to think that a different God was the actual God? Would it be some mathematic formula in some holy book? Or would you think maybe that had been forged? It might have been a later addition to that book. After all, you don't want to just believe at first glance. You're going to do some deeper investigation, right? Because people could write in later on a scientific formula. In fact, it's more likely that that's what happened. There's The Lobsterist, for example, that has 3 books in the series so far, and it makes a scientific statement that is extraordinarily crystal clear and true, but it's one that you can find via Google these days. So is it reasonable to think that maybe somebody just used Google to put that into the holy book? Or is it that we would just accept that that was really from a deity and that that's where that information came from? No, of course not. So if you saw in the sky written, Allah is the real God, become a Muslim now, would you become a Muslim in that very moment? No, I don't think you would. And you wouldn't because, well, what would you think first of all? First of all, you might think that you're hallucinating, or you might think you're dreaming, or you might think that somebody's playing a trick on you. There might be a number of things that you think about before you would then decide in that moment that this is enough for you. You might seek further proof that what you're seeing is legitimately coming from a non-human source, right? So be honest. What would it take for you to think that there's a different God that's actually real? And an even harder question for you to answer would be, what would it take for you to stop thinking that your God is real, and thus that would end your belief in God? Because that'd be it. Christianity teaches that your God's it. So if you don't believe in the Christian God, you don't believe in any God now. Now, maybe you would become a deist or something, or maybe some other religion, because maybe you wouldn't be willing to let go of this particular version of God. So what would it take for you to let go of your version of this Christian God? What would it take for you to let go of a generic Christian God? What would it take for you to let go of the Judeo-Christian God? What would it take for you to let go of all the deity things that are out there, God in general, whatever God is. Those are different questions. Those are different ideas that need to be examined carefully. And what one atheist says, whether he's the smartest atheist in the world or not, I have no idea, doesn't equal what the rest of us would say, just as much as whatever you say wouldn't equal what all other Christians would say. Your answers to what would convince you of a different God are not going to necessarily be the same as every other Christian that's out there. So what you're doing is, it seems, a bit dishonest. It seems like you're cherry picking. And you say you have evidence of your particular God. You mentioned that there is evidence of God, but you don't say what that evidence is. I suspect that by evidence you mean arguments. You don't have evidence of the God. You have arguments that you think point to a particular version of God, not empirical evidence of the phenomenon God itself, not a repeatable test of God itself. So that's something that would be impressive if you had that. The other thing I don't think is genuine here is that you're saying, well, what would it take to convince you? And he says, well, a mathematical formula. And you go, oh, yeah, that's what would convince you, huh? Yeah, right. And then the guy says, well, maybe it would be a forgery. Right, because he'd want to investigate it. But you brush that off and see, yeah, that wouldn't convince him after all. See, nothing would convince him. Well, you don't know that that's not. Just because the guy himself, he can't think of anything. And then you bring up Matt Dillahunty said something similar. But Matt Dillahunty also said that God would know what it would take to convince him. And I sat there and thought, I could write out what it would take to convince me that God exists in general. A Pacific God, wouldn't matter. Whatever God is, if certain criteria were met, I would think that the thing is as close to God as could be. I don't know if I have to think that it's God though. In the same way, you might be skeptical, you might have some questions about the legitimacy of a different God. If some being appeared and did things that you think only God could do, but it wasn't what you thought God was, you might have some doubts about that, wouldn't you? So in the same way, I would probably have a few doubts, but again, if it could read my mind, it would know what to say or do to convince me. But why would it care? That's an interesting question to consider too. Why would God care if you or I or anyone believed it? What would it matter? If it's true, it's gonna. I don't care if you believe me or not. Why should I care? I know you don't believe me. I don't care. Doesn't matter to me. But you think that God does care if we believe or not. If I tell you what it would take for me to believe in any God, let alone your particular version of God, couldn't you say, well, but God won't do that because God is not to be tested? Couldn't you say that God wouldn't do that because insert blank here? Couldn't you come up with a reason why God will not do that? Or say, well, God did this and that's not good enough for you. Well, no, it's not. God appearing to a handful of people thousands of years ago is not good enough for me. And it shouldn't be for you, but apparently it is. But you believe in this particular religion. And those that don't are trying to be honest with this question and struggling with it to come up with an answer. And on the spot, the guy, I don't know what would convince me. That's basically what he says, but you want to take from that the cherry picking of, well, see, he wouldn't be convinced by anything. Well, because it's centered on him. See, there's the problem that you're missing there. If I saw in the sky, hi, Mormons are right, I wouldn't immediately think, well, I guess Mormons are right. I would think, well, maybe I'm dreaming, maybe it's a hallucination, maybe I've gone insane, maybe somebody's playing a trick on me, maybe a lot of things is going on, but I would want to investigate. Now, the bare surface level of that would be to ask somebody else, hey, do you see that in the sky? And then if they say, yes, I'd say, okay, couldn't you describe what you see in the sky to me? So that I know that what they're seeing is similar to what I'm seeing. And perhaps I'd want to take it a step further and say, hey, look, let's write down what we see in the sky, and then we'll exchange papers and see if they are similar in nature. That way, my thoughts don't interfere with their thoughts don't interfere with my thoughts, and we have a more scientific rigor there. But that's just two people. We're going to want more people. The more people we have looking at it, the better that is. And of course, we're going to want to pull out some cameras. We're going to want to pull out some sort of scientific equipment if we have that at our disposal. We want to investigate it, right? Just as much as you would want to investigate any claim made by anything that claimed to be a god. There's a guy, I don't know if he's still around, but he was in Germany claiming to be a reincarnated Jesus. And a lot of people believe in him and follow him and live in this commune around where he is. Well, what would it take for you to believe that that guy is actually a reincarnated Jesus? What would he have to do? And couldn't he or one of his followers say, well, you can't test him. You're not allowed to ask that question. Or you're not allowed to go in there unless you really believe, or unless you do this or that or the other thing. Perhaps doing things that you don't want to do because it's not something that they're willing to demonstrably demonstrate. Your God, or any God for that matter, could easily demonstrate its existence to all humans simultaneously in a way that none of us would mistake for something else. If God said, hey, guys, girls, etc., how's it going? Talk to every single buddy at the same time and have the same exact message, obviously in different languages, to everybody. That would do it. That would be pretty darn convincing. And how about this? Stick around for a little bit. Yeah, don't just disappear after delivering us that message, but be there, stay there in some format that we can interact with so that we can ask it additional questions. Wouldn't that be nice? We could interview God and find out what it thinks about us, how it thinks, what it wants or doesn't want or whatever. Wouldn't you want to do that? Or would you be satisfied with God showing up and it's blue and it looks like an elephant and it says, hey, I'm God, and you're like, well, that's kind of weird. I didn't expect God to be a blue elephant. And you're like, well, look, I just happen to look that way. This isn't really what I actually look like. But it wouldn't be your version of God. So wouldn't you investigate it? Wouldn't you have questions? Or are you simply saying, we should just toss up our arms and go, oh yeah, that's good enough. So I ask you, openly, Apologetic Roadshow, to respond to my video questions here that I'm asking of you. What would it take for you to think a different God existed, what are the criteria that you would have for that God? What would it take for you to think that your God didn't exist, which is similar to the first question but different? Then what would it take for you to think that there was no God at all whatsoever? What would that be like? And maybe you don't have an answer, and that's okay. And maybe we could say, hey, look, in the Bill Nye debate, Ken Ham said nothing would convince him that the Bible was wrong. So that's every Christian is like that. We all know that. I could make that video very easily, couldn't I? Would that convince you of the atheist idea? No. This video isn't about convincing me. It's for your followers. It's for the people that already believe to cheer on their belief, to feel like the other side got owned or pwned. The way that you speak throughout this video betrays that. It exemplifies that. It lets us know you're irritated. You point out on social media, Sky Daddy. Well, that's easy to do, to find a word and complain. How many times in how many comment sections do people say, God bless God, yay? And it's just sad to see that that is a common reaction that many people have across videos of different kinds that say anything positive about God. It's just like, yay, God! It's like, is that all you gotta say? I mean, it's like a bunch of robots here. Where's the originality? Right? I could complain about that. It's not going to do anything for either of us to complain about that, is it? It's not going to convince either one of us that there is or isn't a God. It's not going to get us any closer. I thought apologetics was about defending the idea. How does this defend the idea of God at all? It doesn't. Not even a little bit. So, Apologetics Roadshow, let's see if you respond to anything I've said here or not. I don't think you will. And I'm not going to hold up any hope that you do, because it's far easier to cherry pick and it's far easier to poison the well rather than interact with somebody directly, isn't it? And then maybe you've done some talks or debates. Possible. But let's see. Let's see what you do. Okay, so yeah. I did read some comments, that kind of go over this. Here's somebody saying, God answered and showed them a crazy miracle. But they thought it was, they thought they were insane. Then they tried again, and then they were convinced. But what happens to the person that doesn't get that crazy miracle the first time, right? Here you go. This is the sort of laziness. Nobody can see what I'm reading here. I was homeless, got into drugs, went into prisons. Then I got to know Jesus. He changed my life. That doesn't make it true. Now I make $22K weekly. Have a home, wife, loving daughter, child of God. Hallelujah. Yeah, that's nice. That's not God that did that. That's you that did all those things. It's never been about evidence. It's been about pride. No, it's about evidence. I don't have evidence of your God, and it's nothing to do with pride. I just need evidence. Whatever it is that I'm going to think is true, I'm going to need the same sort of evidence that I do for everything else. This guy was supposedly agnostic until recently, thought he would never receive any proof, and then just suddenly it felt like he had to recite the Lord's Prayer. Just suddenly. Oh, okay. Well, then you've gone crazy in that moment. Got it. And then you thought that you felt the Holy Spirit filling your body. How would you tell that from a mental breakdown? I don't know. Then supposedly they've been a skeptic. That's not. What is what word? Wait, what? How did you spell that? That's Yeah, no, that's right. Okay. Uh, so like my brain did was like, oh, that's wrong. And then he's like, oh, never been interested in looking at. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you weren't. Um, I'm more and more convinced those who identify as atheists are atheists by force of will rather than intellectual reasoning. Well, you're wrong. Well, I'm more and more convinced that you that identify as theists are theists by force of will rather than any intellectual reasoning. See, it doesn't get us anywhere, right? And that's the sort of audience that you're interacting with. Rather, and of course, it's a parasocial relationship that you have because you have a lot of viewers, you have a lot of subscribers, so there's no way that you could interact with all of them. At best, you'll interact with like maybe 4 or 5, right? Uh, so what I'm trying to say is you're people aren't challenging you and you're not challenging yourself here. You didn't point out any real issue other than, well, this one guy wouldn't be convinced. Maybe at best. So what? Who cares? Other of us would be, but we don't have anything at all. And that's the problem. We have nothing to even discuss. And whatever I say would convince me, you could always find a reason to say that that really wouldn't convince me, even if I had it. I know that because I've had this conversation many times. Hope that you respond. Don't expect you to. That's it for now. Let's see. Put Jesus in a test tube fails every time. Yeah. Um, and German Jesus isn't a genie in a bottle, right? Yeah. Well, that's another thing. Yeah, God won't do the thing that you want, even though in the Bible it says when 2 or more gathered in my name, they can ask for anything. But it doesn't actually mean that. It means what you need it to mean. Okay, all right, that's it for now. That's the end of my open letter to Apologetics Roadshow. Don't go away, everyone. I'm going to launch another hangout, Lobster Hangout, so you guys can join there so I can talk to all of you. Take care. Be skeptical.